I don't think anyone's born bad. We did a very large three-piece investigative story on extremism in the military. It actually won what's called the Gerald R. Ford Award. It's probably the most prestigious accolade in defense coverage. There's been a lot of talk about extremism and stuff like that after January 6th, right? And the overwhelming number of veterans and service members that were involved in the insurrection on the Capitol. But we wanted to take a much more nuanced approach. We interviewed neo-Nazis and militiamen. I spent 2 years interviewing a lot of these people, sometimes from their jail cells. We wanted to understand their thinking, and we even went a step further. We interviewed their friends and family, and what we found was when people go down this radicalization thing, these conspiracy theories, or going down the neo-Nazi rabbit holes, this affects their family and stuff, and almost in a similar way alcohol abuse might, or drug.
Hey, today's guest is Stephen Beynon, national security reporter at military.com and the U.S. Army veteran. I'm glad to have you here today.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, what's your story? How did you become the national security reporter?
Oh man, that's a long one. I joined the National Guard actually when I was 17. Funny story about that. You join the military a year before you're an adult, and the thought process was, well, if I hate it, that's a whole year off the plate. I'm still in high school, but I ended up digging in, and I got to go to Afghanistan and such like that. But I always wanted to be a journalist.
Today, I want to tell you about a book I'm reading. It's written by 25 veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, all graduates of the Masters of Business for Veterans program at the University of Southern California. The book is called Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation. It collects the personal stories of veterans written in their own words. Pick it up for yourself or a veteran you love. Check out the link in the description for 10% off.
And I cut my teeth in local Cincinnati news. For folks listening, I was there during the Harambe incident where a gorilla was shot at the Cincinnati Zoo. If you go to like really old reporting on that, you'll see my byline. And then came out to DC to work for Politico, where I never actually thought about covering the military until I got there. The editor Sudeep kind of put the idea in my head. Just you're a military guy, you know the jargon, because the military is so impenetrable. You take a reporter or something, it might take them a year or two to even understand the rank structure. It's such a weird organization. So I kind of drifted from covering politics to the military slowly. I did a very short stint, a temporary stint at Bloomberg, and then went on to Stars and Stripes for a while, and here I am at military.com.
It's a very interesting story. So you joined the National Guard at 17.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know you'd be deployed to Afghanistan, or was it pre 9/11?
Yeah, no, I mean, I enlisted in 2008, and I enlisted. So it's weird. So the National Guard is a really great opportunity for people who want to do everything they want to do in the military, while building a civilian career. And I knew I wanted to do both things. I wanted to go to war. So that's why I joined. But I also want to go to college and build my journalism career and everything. I think it was a recruiter that came to my high school and told me like, oh, there's like this whole part-time element in the military, and I was like, oh, cool, that solves my problem. I don't have to pick between the two.
So you enrolled in college after you served in the military, right?
Yeah, actually. During, I did some stuff in the Guard, and then I continued in college while I was doing. I actually had to drop out constantly to do military stuff. I was actually what you would call back then. There's this phrase, guard bum. A guard bum is someone who they're technically a part-time soldier, but they like are always going on deployments or going to like schools or various training events and stuff like that. I was really into it when I was much younger, and then I actually dropped out to go to Afghanistan, then came back, and it took me like freaking 7 years to get a 4-year degree. So there's the pitch of the Guard that I just mentioned. Hey, you can do both things, but it's also, you're not going to get the fastest track of both those things. Guard careers build very much slower than active duty in the same way, where if you're building a civilian career, that might not go at the pace you might not like it either.
And when you were serving, did you have a chance to do some journalism on the ground, or wasn't it an option for you?
No, I didn't have a journalism job until maybe halfway through college, where I worked at a local Fox affiliate for a while. And actually, before that, the first job I got, I interned in the Senate, actually, because there was like this weird middle point in school. This is like a rambly answer, but I wanted to go into journalism to like understand like policy and how the government works and everything. And then someone put the idea in my head. I was like, well, you could do the policy thing, right? And so I like flirted with the idea of doing like government staffing. And then I got an opportunity to go to DC, and I asked, oh, what does it pay? And you do the math, and government employees are paid, they're paid terribly. Not that journalism is much better off, but I can afford to eat as a journalist.
So, which skills from the military were very useful or you apply in your journalism career now?
I think there's a couple things. That's an interesting question. How it can translate to journalism is, I mean, a kind of a boring answer, but it's pretty true. Is in the military, you are forced to work with a diverse group of people, and you're out of your comfort zone. Like you have to be able to talk to a very blue collar person, someone from cities and suburbs, and like you get immediately exposed to so many different cultures, and the military has long stretches of boredom, and you have to be able to carry conversations with these people and build friendships and connections. And that's kind of what journalism is. I mean, people see the final product and stuff a lot with stories, but 99% of journalism is just building relationships and being able to maintain a conversation.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So, what kind of reporting? You said that you transitioned from more about political journalism
Mhm.
to military focused. So, what kind of reporting you've done over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I started in like typical like local journalism. This is highway accidents, who gets shot in the street. I covered city council in Cincinnati forever. Cincinnati is a fantastic town to learn how to cover politics because everyone in city council always ends up in jail or some sort of issue. Our mayor was Jerry Springer for a while. Great town. And then politics, I grew up when President Trump just came on the scene. And my entry level job at Politico, this is back when you wrote a news story every time he wrote a tweet. And so that was sort of how how I got my start, but before kind of evolving into much more higher quality and deeper journalism that I hope I deliver now, at least semi regular.
And what made you slowly switch and transition to the military focused journalism?
Yeah, so I mean, my advice to up and coming journalists is you kind of got to pick a thing, right? And I think going into military journalism was it's just a thing I knew. Kind of going back to what I was talking about, like the military is so impenetrable, like understanding policies and ranks and who does what. I mean, just the difference between an enlisted and officer. For people listening, it doesn't sound like much, but I've had to explain it to reporters, and it's a ton. And that's like a very hard concept for people to understand. So it's literally just an avenue I went because it was something I knew, and that was just the path open to me. But I'm not married to that. I mean, when I was younger, like I would have no issue be covering immigration. I actually originally wanted to cover climate change, and it's just kind of like a path that just never necessarily opened up. I would have no issue covering the Department of Justice or anything, so long as I can cover the intersection of policy and when it impacts people. And in the military, there's a lot of opportunity to cover that, especially now. There's things to write about the quality of life conditions for soldiers. There's a lot of cultural issues to cover right now, particularly with what we're doing with trans soldiers, how we are treating women in the service. Covering the military is not just who did we blow up today. I mean, these are real people to write about. If you think about it, other than the federal prison system, people who serve in the military, the people that I like to talk to and I like to cover, their lives are very much controlled by the government, and that is something that I try to understand, that I try to report on, of what someone's life is like. Effectively, when the federal government controls many aspects of it, and that's where we are seeing issues with housing conditions, food, or just like how overworked these soldiers are with all their missions and stuff like that. These are very important things to cover.
Yeah, interesting perspective, interesting
Mhm.
analogy. What were some of your biggest or most notable stories or investigations or reportings that you did in your career?
Yeah, so probably the biggest one was maybe 2 years ago. We did a very large three-piece investigative story on extremism in the military. It actually won what's called the Gerald R. Ford Award. It's probably the most prestigious accolade in defense coverage. There's been a lot of talk about extremism and stuff like that after January 6th, right? and the overwhelming number of veterans and service members that were involved in the insurrection on the Capitol. But we didn't want to we wanted to take a much more nuanced approach. We interviewed neo Nazis and militiamen. I spent 2 years interviewing a lot of these people, sometimes from their jail cells. We wanted to understand their thinking, and we even went a step further. We interviewed their friends and family, and what we found was when people go down this radicalization thing, these conspiracy theories, or going down the neo-Nazi rabbit hole, this affects their family and stuff, and almost in a similar way alcohol abuse might, or drugs. These people, they get sucked into this disinformation, just disaster, basically. So we were able to catalog like how these extremist groups take advantage of veterans and service members, and how they kind of fall into this disinformation trap, and sometimes how that turns into violence. And we covered it in a very sensitive way that didn't lampoon these people, didn't make fun of them. We took it very seriously, and I think it is not to blow smoke up our asses, but I think that's a very landmark piece in a very serious issue.
Have you ever felt like spending time around people like neo-Nazis or radicals have influenced you by any chance? Because, the more time you spend with any group of people, the more you become similar to that. And obviously
Mm.
you have the separation and boundary as a journalist, but still, have you ever felt like there was any effect on you when you were interviewing not just them, but any kinds of people?
Yeah, I mean, I did they influence me? No, and not in the traditional sense. I felt really bad for them, and this is when kind of going back to the analogy of alcoholism or drug abuse. I don't think, and I don't want to whitewash what these people have done, or their beliefs or anything, but I think in a lot of cases these people are almost victims in a weird kind of upside down way. I think they go on the internet, the algorithms just really feed on hatred, and they almost escalate the information they're getting. I kind of liken that to drugs as well. There's nothing wrong with listening to maybe like a Ben Shapiro or a Joe Rogan or something. That can be Long Island iced teas, right? The way the internet works just progresses you to harder and harder drugs or information, and all of a sudden maybe you're doing meth with Candace Owens or something like that. And these people are often maybe in economic disadvantages, or they've had unsuccessful romantic lives, or they're unhealthy themselves, and a lot of that is due to their own self-destruction. They don't get dates or marriages is because they're jerks in a lot of cases. But you can see how this all these failures as a person kind of like snowballs into greater and greater failures, where they're just so ostracized from society, and that radicalization just builds and festers over time. Someone could be a bad person, but I think you have to be able to understand where that comes from. And maybe this is just my hippie sort of mindset comes in, where I don't think anyone's born bad, and what a journalist has to do is understand like where does this come from, like how did, like, you are in jail because you tried to overthrow the government, and you're a terrible racist, but what happened, how did that happen to you? And that is what I think we try to get at, and I think we got it pretty successful.
So how do you fight that radicalization and algorithms that keep pushing you into one direction or another? It seems like with any kind of media now, it's, as you said, it just feeds on itself. It's like a snowball. How do you, as a society, fight that?
That's a really good question, and that's sort of the dour part of it. I don't know how you fight it. I think it requires the person to be self-aware. It requires them to frankly be educated, and it requires people to have a good news diet. Because a lot of this stuff starts with people going down weird, like, alternative media, at weird corners of the internet. And there's nothing wrong. I kind of like, also like going back to like my food and booze metaphor. I kind of like look at the media like that too. Like there's nothing wrong with, let's call like primetime cable news cotton candy, right? We're having cotton candy with Tucker Carlson or something like that. But that can get much more deviant as you go down these really weird media channels and stuff like that, where there's people, there's these weird like white supremacist podcasts and stuff like that. We'll compare that to meth again, like we did with Candace Owens or something like that. So people have to take ownership of how they consume media. They have to be self-aware, and frankly have a good support network. Going back to how it's maybe kind of like alcoholism. I don't know how I don't know if it's easy to identify that manifesting as it's happening until it's too late, and that's kind of like the sad part of it.
Yeah, so it seems to be one of the downsides, if you can call it that, or
Hmm.
what free speech gives us
Hmm.
is it gives us a lot of good things, but at the same time, people can go down those rabbit holes, and it's probably not a good idea to to restrain any of that. But at the same time, it seems like nowadays with new technology and
Hmm.
the types of media, it just makes people more divided. Would you say that over the years, maybe if we take a look at the past 100 years, the evolution of media, it made things worse because of
Hmm.
the algorithms and the way, it works in general?
Yeah, I almost think there's almost way too much media, right? Anyone can start a podcast, and I think this gets into trust in mainstream media. I think, and I think that's like a 5 hour conversation right there of various issues the mainstream media has, and I think people go to these alternatives because it tells them what they want to hear, right? Like you don't want to go read something that tells you maybe why what you thought was wrong or something like that, or gives you answers that are incomplete. Often when you read something, maybe it could be us at military.com or it could be the New York Times or something like that. Not every story has a immediate solution to a problem necessarily. But if you go to these like really hyper partisan outlets or these like weird podcasts or stuff like that, there is a very, if people pay attention, there's a very obvious like villain. There's a solution to the problem. It's blaming groups of people. It's my biggest, I guess, kind of the biggest red flag you would see is the easier someone says a problem is, and the broader blame they cast, whether that's on a demographic or something, that's usually a signal to maybe go somewhere else.
But at the same time, thinking about the media evolution, 200 years ago, the only way you learn the news, you read the newspaper, or
Hmm.
talk to your family and friends. Now everyone can go to the internet. Almost everyone has a voice.
Hmm.
So technically, it's expanding free speech, and
Hmm.
it probably gives a lot of benefits at the same time. But also, you have to be aware of the negative aspects.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like with everything has pros and cons. I wouldn't want to live in the 18th century where there were like two newspapers, so presumably only like two editors and maybe a handful of reporters and everything. Like all the information was heavily gate kept. Like that also sucks, right? So there needs to be a balance, right? There needs to be. This has never been a more important time for journalists because they're trained in verifying information. You need those people. But there's also a huge spot for, I hate the phrase new media because it's really not new. I feel like people just learned about podcasts last year. Like Joe Rogan has had a huge podcast for freaking 20 years, right? Like there is a huge spot for those people, but they also need to they need to be good stewards almost with their audience. Kind of going back to the Joe Rogan question, he's ultimately a comedian. I've listened to a ton of his shows, but he also needs to understand is while he's a comedian and just asking questions and he wants a fast loose podcast, I think your responsibility changes when you have 10 million listeners as well. Like you have to be cognizant of what you're putting out there and who you're platforming and the kind of information that's going on your show. So it kind of requires everyone to be a good custodian of information. Anyone can have a podcast or a newspaper or whatever. I welcome it, but everyone needs to understand how things are perceived when they put stuff out in the world.
Another problem that we are facing now today is the rise of AI, deepfakes,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the similar technologies that can be used in a
Mm-hmm.
really bad way. I'm pretty young. I am a programmer. I'm a software engineer myself. I know
Mm-hmm.
how AI works. At the same time, I find myself falling for deepfakes, scrolling through Instagram reels and seeing like the some politician saying something, and
Mm-hmm.
then I realized it was an AI, and they didn't even understand that at the time. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think we're doomed, man. Like that stuff's only getting better, right? I mean, this stuff didn't exist 4 years ago, and it's getting pretty good. So I'm not even thinking about. I'm thinking about what does this look like in 15 years. I mean, how do you even begin to counter that? And it almost goes back to my original point, like people needing to follow like trust this. People need to know where their information is coming from. Military.com is not going to communicate things with deepfakes. The New York Times isn't going to do it. ABC News isn't going to do it. That's why when you're getting information, people need to not only understand the outlet they're on, the reporter that they're dealing with. And I think one of the biggest concerns is how easy would it be to duplicate you and me? Like someone can probably already do it, and if they can't do it now, it's getting pretty close. And frankly, I'm waiting for the first big case of the press getting duped. Most of us are experts in verifying information, knowing where things are coming from, and checking with reliable sources. But one day, I promise you, one day, maybe it's in an hour or maybe it's in 5 years, right? There will be something that seemingly comes from the White House or the Pentagon or Congress that looks extremely legit. People will report on it, and it was totally fake. And that I guarantee that will happen at some point.
I've seen some people speculating if China invades Taiwan, what might happen with the news, because they might start these fake news campaigns,
Mm-hmm.
AI or whatever it is, which would, snowball into the Western media. And we've seen part of that in the Ukraine war, when at the
Mm-hmm.
start of the war, Russia, shared some deep fakes of the Ukrainian president saying what he never said. It was obviously fake, but the
Mm-hmm.
technology has evolved, and yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that what might be a cure for that is some kind of trust, where you know that this is coming from the source that you
Mm-hmm.
trust, whether it's you're on Instagram and you have a check mark, or
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn, or a website like military.com. Would you
Mm-hmm.
say that that would probably be the future of how that you build the relationship with reporters?
Yeah, and I think you see it's a little lower than I thought it would be, but I think the business is moving towards you follow reporters, not people. Maybe you don't care about the New York Times, but maybe you care about Maggie Haberman. Maybe you don't care about military.com, but you follow me or something like that. I think the reporter is going to be divorced from the outlet, and people need to build relationships with that reporter. Maybe you don't follow the Washington Post, but you follow a handful of reporters there. And I think that'd be the best, most media savvy way to get information and know it's like good to go. Know that reporter's social media handles, know how they write, and follow them on their various verified platforms. But the problem is, frankly, people don't have time for that. People got to go grocery shopping and pick up their kids and stuff like that. And people barely know news outlets or the differences between them, let alone an individual reporter. I think that asks so much of just the normal person, but that's the answer. But I don't think that is a reasonable request for most people, because people are busy with their kids and shit. Like people got other things to do than to pay attention to the news necessarily in such a savvy way. So yeah, China invades Taiwan. People are just going to be on Instagram, and they're going to see a lot of bullshit, frankly, from like weird accounts or accounts that it's not military.com, it's military.com, but there's like two R's in it or something like that. Like they try to sneak past the goalie or something like that. I think we're just gonna see people get duped a lot, and I think that's again the problem of there being almost too much information and too much freedom to maneuver online, and this AI stuff is going to get. I think it's going to get extremely convincing in the next 10 or 15 years.
Would you say that some kind of a government intervention in this space, not necessarily restricting any free
Mhm.
speech or anything, but some kind of involvement would be helpful, or would it just make things worse in the long term?
Government intervention. I mean, that scares me. I wouldn't want that. I don't want the government defining what is and what isn't news and what isn't legitimate media. I mean, I almost think Twitter had it, right? Twitter had an actually like good verifications. Like the checkmark system worked. Like people who were checkmarked needed to be checkmarked, and then they just pissed that away, frankly. And Facebook is garbage. I don't see Instagram as a good source for news information. And the only other avenue to make sure you're getting high quality news information is actually just going on the sites themselves. But like no one goes on a website anymore. Like I actually do type in NewYorkTimes.com, but like I'm basically a boomer doing that. Like people like the news has to come to you. This is why newsletters are actually really successful right now. But I think that's going to be outdated in 10 years. Like the idea of like an email address, like people aren't going to do that. So I don't know how people are going to consume things, but some sort of like lock and key verification system, like the Twitter of would be the way to go. But I mean, the government is where I'm putting my Tea Party hat on. The government needs to probably stay the hell away from dictating what is and isn't news, because that is much more dangerous than, oh, I might fall for some AI slop on Instagram. But ultimately, this also does like fall on people to just pay attention a little bit. But that also goes back to what I said of people don't have time for that stuff, and that's also very understandable.
True. And I'll let you share the final message with the listeners, something that we haven't had a chance to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think now is an especially interesting time to be covering the Department of Defense. There's a lot of there's an enormous chilling effect of things that are going on, namely the culture war going on, waged by Pete Hegseth and the administration. And the thing I'm keeping my ear to the ground for is how this impacts real people. I'm thinking about women in the service, minorities in the service, and how this kind of shakes out in the next couple of years, and not just with them, but like attitudes towards them. I think the biggest thing to be looking at right now is it's not the chilling effect per se, like that sucks for those people for the next couple of years, but it's how soldiers and leaders being raised now see that, and does that influence how they lead the military in the years to come? And rather not, is how we're treating now going to influence and stain how people are treated later, even when maybe certain policies and attitudes are reversed on the systemic level. That's a rambly way of me saying, hey, people in the military now, are they getting influence from higher powers, and are they going to carry that influence when those higher powers are gone? And I think that's one of the biggest things to pay attention to right now.
All right, thank you for coming, Steve. Great insights, a lot of interesting stories and perspectives. Thank you again for coming over.
Awesome, man. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.